Okay, so thank you for watching this video. My name is Xia Lei, and I'm a PhD student in operations research at Columbia University. So today I'm going to present a very fun paper, which is called Loot Box Pricing and Design. And this is a joint work with Ningwen from University of Toronto, Adam, who is my advisor, and Michael from University of Pittsburgh. So the problem in our paper is originated from the video game industry, which is fast growing in recent years. And according to a business report, the revenue from video game last year is about $152 billion. And to give you a sense of how large it is, the ride-hailing segment, which is super popular in our community, amounts to $183 billion revenue last year. So you can see that these two industries are quite comparable, but the problems in video game industry has been long overlooked. And the topic today is loot box, which is a common practice in video games. So what is a loot box? A loot box is a random allocation of virtual items whose contents are not revealed until after purchase. So this definition may look too formal, but actually the concept of loot box is not new. For example, about 30 years ago, we already have the NBA basketball card packs. So inside you may receive some cards of current basketball players, but you don't know which card you will receive. Another example is a blind box from Disney. So inside this box, there's a small toy, but you don't know which character you will receive. On the other hand, you can see the probability of each outcome. For example, you will have 1/6 chance to receive Elsa and 1/12 chance to receive Anna. Okay. And this is an example of loot box in video game. So this is a racing game. Here's a box, and inside there are tears, stickers, sprays, and even new cards. And such a box costs $149. Okay. And according to a business report, loot boxes accounting for $30 billion revenue in 2018. So it's a huge segment. But on the other hand, loot boxes are controversial. For example, there are always some transparency issues about the content and probability outcomes of loot boxes. And also, people are concerned that there's a link between gambling and loot boxes. So actually, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States held a workshop on these issues last August, and we were invited to present this paper at the FTC workshop. So based on this background, our research question is, why would video game companies use loot boxes instead of some common deterministic selling strategies, such as bundling and separate selling? And second, how to optimally price and design loot boxes? And finally, what is the impact of the loot boxes on the consumer set? So before going into our model, I would like to mention several distinct features of items in video games. First, it has zero marginal cost because they are digital products. Second, customers may purchase many loot boxes and make their decisions sequentially based on not only the allocation rule of the loot boxes, but also their own sampling history. And finally, and most importantly, the seller has full information of customers' inventory and full control over price allocation rules of the loot boxes, as well as the resale of the items. So based on these unique features, we believe that a new framework is needed to analyze the decision of a revenue maximizing company. So let me introduce our model. So in this talk, I'm not going into the technical details, but it's helpful to introduce some notations here. So we assume there are totally n items for sale in the game, and the customer has IID valuation for each item. It's mean valuation mu. And for any duplicate item, it has 0 value. For example, suppose you have 2 hats in the game, which looks exactly the same, but at each time you could only wear one of them, so the second copy gives you 0 value. Okay. And in terms of loot box, we assume that each loot box has a fixed price P and only outputs one item. And at each period T, we use ST to denote the customer inventory set. Okay. And in this work, we consider 2 types of allocation rules, which is unit box and traditional box. So what is unit box? Unit loot boxes allocate an item uniformly at random without replacement. That is, they never allocate duplicates. Okay. So this is an example of unit box in practice. So in the red square, you can see that you will not receive duplicates until you get one of each. So unit box never allocate duplicates. A traditional box is simple. Traditional loot boxes allocate an item uniformly at random with replacement. So for each time, you have 1/n probability to receive each item. And as a result, you will receive duplicates in some cases. So actually, the previous example is a traditional box. So this is very simple, 1/n for each item. Okay. And in the paper, we assume that consumers' valuation for the next box is the mean utility of all the possible outcomes, so they are risk neutral, and customers will purchase loot boxes repeatedly until they no longer expect positive net utilities. So let me use that example to illustrate what happens in our model. So suppose we have a traditional box here, which has 6 items, and when a customer comes, he looks inside, he will generate 6 numbers over his head, which is the valuation of the items. And the box is priced at $2.99. So when he faces the first box, his valuation to the box is the average of the 6 numbers, which is 4.5, and it's greater than $2.99. So he will purchase the first box. And this time he got a code. So when he faces the second box, he has this code in his inventory set, and his valuation to this code drops to 0. So in this case, his valuation to the second box is $3, which is still greater than $2.99. So he will purchase the second one. And this time, unfortunately, he received a duplicate. So when he faces the third box, everything remains the same, and he will purchase the third one. And in this case, he's lucky and he got a new item. And when he faced the fourth box, he has 2 items in his inventory set, and correspondingly, the valuation of the new item drops to 0. And in this case, his valuation to the fourth box is $2, which is less than price, so he will live at this stage. So during this process, he purchased totally 3 loot boxes, and the cumulative revenue is $8.97. And the surplus is the total valuation of these 2 items minus the revenue, which is $603. Okay. So in the paper, we consider 2 benchmarks. The first one is grand bundle, which means that we sell all the n items with one large price. And the second one is separate selling, which is we sell each item individually with a retail price. So both benchmarks are very common and straightforward in practice. And our goal here is to theoretically describe the optimal seller and consumer behavior, as well as the corresponding impact on the seller's revenue and the consumer surplus. So in the paper, it is actually not clear which loot box has higher revenue, because intuitively, unit box has no duplicate, so people has high valuation for that, and we can set a high price for unit box. On the other hand, traditional box has duplicate. So in that sense, they will have high selling volume, so high revenue. So it is actually not clear which loot box has higher revenue. So in this paper, we'll focus on asymptotic regime, where the number of items goes to infinity. And this is quite reasonable in practice because, as you may know, there are more than 800 Pokemon cards, and there are more than 500 players in NBA basketball games to sample from loot boxes. So for asymptotic regime, we will use normalized revenue and surplus as the performance metric. That is revenue per item divided by n. Okay. So in this case, any strategy's normalized revenue is at most mu, the mean valuation, because in the best case, the seller could take away all the customer valuation to be his revenue. And a paper 20 years ago says that grand bundle is asymptotically optimal. That is, the limiting revenue is mu for grand bundle. So the proof is quite straightforward, and it's based on the law of large number. But on the other hand, the result is not that practical, because no one can really afford an infinite size bundle, right? So let me show you the result in our paper. So here we have, for ID valuations, as the number of items goes to infinity, we have the key metrics for both unit box and traditional box. So in terms of revenue, the unit box earns the limiting revenue of mu, which means that it is also asymptotically optimal. On the other hand, traditional box only earn mu over E, so it only earns 37% of the optimal revenue. And in terms of the price, you can see that the price of unit box goes to mu, and the traditional box, the price of traditional box goes to mu over E. So indeed, the unit box has a higher price. But when we look at the selling volume, it is somewhat surprising that both unit box and traditional box has roughly the same selling volume, which is close to N. Okay, and finally, because unit box is asymptotically optimal for the seller, it leaves zero surplus to the customer. On the other hand, traditional box is not that effective in terms of revenue maximization, so it actually leaves some positive surplus to the customer. So this theorem actually provides insights to both the seller and the customers. For seller, we show that the value of knowing and monitoring customer inventory is huge. Literally, we can improve the revenue from 37% to 100%. And also, we show that unit boxes are asymptotically optimal, just like a grant bundle. But now we don't require the customer to pay a lot upfront. For customers, as a customer, I always assume that unit box is better because it doesn't have duplicate. So I will purchase less and I will spend less. But it turns out that both intuitions are wrong. Actually, customers will consume almost the same amount of both unit box and traditional box. And actually, they have to pay more and have less surplus for unit boxes. So this is our baseline models. And in the paper, we consider several extensions. For example, in some cases, each loot box may output multiple items, like Pokemon card packs. And we show that everything holds just like the baseline model. And a more interesting case is like, what if we have multiple classes of items and the evaluation is not IID anymore? For example, this is a screenshot from a mobile game. And you can see that in this game, we have epic item, rare item, and uncommon item. So 3 classes of items. So in this case, it is natural to consider non-uniform allocation. And our goal is to optimize both the price and the allocation rule to maximize the revenue. Okay. So in this case, we firstly show that uniform allocation is asymptotically optimal for both unit box and traditional box. So here, uniform allocation means that each item has the equal chance to be sampled. For example, let's say we have 500 basketball cards. Among them, 50 are gold cards, 100 cards are silver cards, and the rest of them are bronze cards. So what we claim is that for a traditional box, the optimal way to do that is simply set 0.2% chance for each card. But on the other hand, when people look at the loot box in the store, they will see that they have 10% chance to receive gold cards, 20% chance to receive silver cards, and 70% chance to receive bronze cards. So this is what we call uniform allocation. And further, based on this, we show that everything holds just like the baseline model. For example, the unit box is still asymptotically optimal, and the traditional box still earns mu over E in this case. So next, I would like to discuss from the customer perspective. The first thing is that sometimes the sellers offer trading system for unwanted items, and we would like to see the impact. And the second thing is about the transparency and the regulatory issue. So first, trading system. When a trading system is offered, any item, either duplicate or unwanted, can be traded in for a value of C. For example, this is a screenshot from the video game, and when you have an item from the loot box, you can click recycle and get some reward from it. Okay, so in this case, we still assume that the seller wants to maximize his profit, which is now revenue minus the salvage cost. Okay, so our first result is that under asymptotic regime, with trading system, we can have a complete relation about the 4 candidate strategies now, which is grant bundle and unit box are both asymptotically optimal, and they are greater than traditional box, and all of them are better than the separate selling. So with this chain, you can clearly see why the seller favors loot boxes. Compared to the grant bundle, loot boxes doesn't require a large payment upfront, and compared to the separate selling, it has higher revenue. And when we look at the consumer surplus, we find that actually the trading system barely increases the customer surplus. For a profit maximizing seller, the trading system may improve the consumer surplus by at most 1.4% and negative in most cases. So this 1.4% is the theoretical bound for any II devaluation, and it is tight. So basically, our analysis shows that the trading system is more like a tool to increase the revenue for the seller, but barely increase the customer surplus. And finally, I would like to discuss a little bit about the regulatory issues. So it's actually not hard to imagine that lying about the allocation rule will be profitable. For example, there's a lawsuit in South Korea saying that the claimed odds of an item is 1%, but the real lapse frequency is 0.0005%. So in this case, if the customer trusts the seller, he will purchase much more and gives much more money to the seller. So this looks silly, but what is non-trivial is that we find that even a random perturbation strategy will be profitable. For example, for a traditional box, when a customer comes, we randomly separate the items into two parts, one part with probability slightly higher than 1 over n, and the other part with probability slightly lower than 1 over n. And such a random perturbation strategy earns strictly larger revenue, even if epsilon is very small in this case. But in that case, the real lapse frequency will be balanced because I randomly separate items into two parts, and it's hard to detect. So this random perturbation strategy example shows that we need the regulator to have better supervision about the sampling rules, not only about the real lapse frequency. So to summarize, we provide the first mathematical model for loot boxes, and we provide insight to three sides of the market: the seller, the customer, and the regulators. For seller, we show that the unit boxes are asymptotically optimal, where traditional box only earns 37% of the revenue. And this result holds under different settings. And we also show that uniform allocation is asymptotically optimal when the items have multiple classes of valuations. For customers, we show that customers actually pay more and earn less surplus when they face unit boxes. And we find that trading system is more like a tool to increase revenue, but barely increase consumer surplus. And for regulators, we pin down the profitability behind loot box strategy, even without considering psychological effects like gambling. And we also show that cheating on allocation rule is profitable and needs proper supervision. So I will stop here. The paper is online, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Thank you.